Can everyone see me?
Yeah, I can see you, Alexandra.
Yes.
The way someone showed me the other day that you can see the presentation and the person. I would just show myself a little bit, then I would turn off the camera because I don't know how. If you can see both the presentation and myself, is it possible?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can see both. Yeah.
Ah,
yeah.
nice. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining. It's actually a pleasure being here. Thanks for the invite, and it's great to support such a great cause. I did invite a friend who actually one of the most experts and most talent person that I've worked with, Tao, to work with me on this session and give some thoughts about what are we doing about security when we work with Azure and how we create security environments working on a model where we automate everything we deploy through automation with this um, zero trust model. So good afternoon. My name is Alessandro. I'm a Microsoft program architect. I'm based in Australia. I have like many years in the history. Now I used to be a Microsoft MVP before joining Microsoft. So that's a little bit about me. I put my Twitter handle there. If you want to connect with me, feel free. And if there is any questions, please just post the questions in Teams. We will do our best to answer it. And if I can't, if there is no time to answer all the questions, just ping me afterwards. I'll hand over to Tao to introduce himself.
Thanks, Alexandra. Hi, my name is Tao. I'm also based in Australia, like Alexandra. I'm based in Melbourne. I'm a Microsoft MVP, been with in the MVP program for about 9 years now. So yeah, nowadays I do a lot of work with Microsoft Consulting Services. Especially, I've done few engagements with Alexandra. I've known Alexandra for a long time, even before he joined Microsoft. So yeah, it's a thank you, Alexandra, for inviting me to this session, and thanks for everyone for attending this session to hear what we have to present. My Twitter handle is there. If you guys need to get hold of me, just yeah, just ping me on Twitter. Thank you. Over to you, Alexandra.
Oh, thanks, Tao. Okay, so I'm going to start this session just talk a little bit about what is this zero trust and why we talk about it. Um, one of the biggest concerns we have when we implement cloud environment is security, right? And one of the things we need to think about is security is not just about firewalls, or it's not just about identity, it's not just about um, application, or it's not just about people. We need to consider the whole it's the whole ecosystem. We need to think about how people interact with applications today, how we interact with the network, how we consume a application, or how even we um, consume data. Uh, as you may know, there is a lot of leaks in the past year. I did actually put some of those in our agenda, and I'll talk a little bit about it. So if we think about what's happening not just in the past year, but I would say very recently, there is a lot of sophisticated attacks growing, especially targeting data, targeting the health, targeting telcos, targeting banks. The target is actually after um, our data and information about us that can be used against us. That they're becoming more and more sophisticated on how they actually um, go after data, and data is becoming gold now. And it's very important that we, as an individual, we also actually take actions to protect our data and be mindful as to what we shared and in work as well. Be mindful what our actions are going to lead to. So here's just some of the examples of the attackers that increasing in the objectives, like abuse of supply chain, high rates of compromise achieve, social engineering. That's a big one happening. Someone posing as you, and this is now becoming more and more easy because we share things about ourselves in the social media, and hackers are getting access to our data by hacking governments or hacking health insurance or hacking telcos, and by doing this they have access of information that we thought they wouldn't. And if you think, for example, if you lose your password on a bank, is this is and then you call the bank, they ask questions, and I found that amazing because they ask questions that is so easy to find, asking questions about um, things that you probably have already published through your social media. It doesn't matter what the social media is, but Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, many others that are there. I'm sure if you search for your name, you'll find majority of the questions that your banks ask are there. So we really need to be careful about what we share, what we expose about ourselves and the company that we work and so on. So the other thing as well is vulnerabilities, and that's one of the basis for the work that we have been doing, which is making sure that when we implement a solution, that solution is kept up to date, because especially when we talk about cloud, things evolve almost every day. If you look at all cloud providers, you see that all of them release new features every day. So those new features, they add more things, more features that you need to think about how you're going to address or look at mitigations or look at updating the code that you have already. So, and as I mentioned, the targeting government agencies, they're targeting anything that can give them access to data or is valuable. Um, Remote work as well. That's another thing that is, especially with the COVID, everyone working remote, they actually target a lot of that. If we look at the research that what happens if in 2000 through 2020, 80% of the cloud breach was due to misconfiguration. And that's actually kind of interesting because I've seen so much of those issues when working with customers and in the industry. It's you configuring your application in one way, in the non-prod environment, and a different way in production. You exposing your application through the internet without a protection. You exposing credentials in your code with password and usernames. You not updating the images that you have. You set up a SQL, for example, and you never install any updates. You set up a VM and never deploy an update. So there is a lot of issues that is that's waiting to be attacked out there, and that's exactly what the attacker of the hackers they are waiting for, is for us to do exactly like this. It's for us to don't do the right things by applying security patches, or it's really common. There is a lot of customers out there or people out there that actually don't do that. So how can we think about defending against threats? How can we work about this? I created two slides here. One from a person perspective, the other one from a infrastructure perspective. If we think from a person, implementing multi-factor authentication, PIM, changing default passwords, using VPNs. Can I ask here people on this call to just put just press that hand on if you have multi-factor authentication when you're deploying your Azure environment or PIN. Who does this on the company when you are working that has activated? Just a few. Yeah. So what about changing the default passwords? It looks like it's strange asking for this, right? But there is a lot of people who doesn't. I give one example. I was reading the other day that a lot of attacks are happening into security cameras, and I was like really interesting to read that the majority of the attacks it's because people don't actually change the default password when they actually buy the security cameras. So they buy the security cameras to protect themselves, to protect a house or a company or whatever they're trying to protect. They actually don't change the default password on the camera or on the device that is getting the feed from the cameras. So they're actually doing the opposite. They're actually exposing themselves to the hacker. The hacker is there listening to them and actually seeing everything that is coming to their house and are actually able to get everything from you as like what time you leave your house, what time you get to your house, who comes to your house, what is the plate of your car, so much information that we don't think about it. So yes, make sure you change your default password. Use VPN services when using mobile. Um, that's so important. A lot of people don't think about the importance of this, but I can guarantee you that everyone on this call here would go to a shopping center, would go into a train station, or go into McDonald's or whatever other places where there is free wireless, and you would be connecting to that free wireless. And worse, sometimes you even do banking through that free wireless. I would be surprised if I hear someone saying that he never did that. So they we do things that just hacker just there waiting for us to do this. So they are listening to all those things in public Wi-Fi. So very important to some of those actions very important. So make sure that you back up your personal data, that you check your account to recover information, that you actually set up MFA in your social media. Have you done this? Have you set up a MFA in your social media? So the other one is how can we protect the infrastructure? We talk about protecting us, and now how do we implement this zero trust in the environment where we are working? So I put some ones here. I would say defense in depth strategies, automation, monitoring, patching, identity, asset inventory, education of users, training. And if you look at the last one that I put in bold and underline, which is repeat, is that we must understand that on a cloud environment, there is no such thing as set up and forget. Cloud is always evolving. We need to understand this, that whatever we deploy, we must keep eyes on, we must keep monitoring, must keep updating, we must keep be patching, we must be looking the identity, we must be protecting that service that we are deploying, that we must train the users because if you don't educate users, if they don't understand how they're going to deploy a solution, how they're going to use that solution, that is guaranteed they are going to have misconfiguration. If you don't know how to deploy a SQL in Azure, if you don't know how to deploy a Cosmos DB, if you don't know how to set up a network in Azure, it means you're not going to be the right configuration. So, and you're probably going to expose your environment. Does it make sense? Let's move. So considering this, and what we have been doing is looking to how can we take this zero trust approach. I mentioned this before. The first thing is making sure that we automate everything. So everything is done through automation. Then another thing is verify explicitly. Use least privilege and assume breach. I put those three there, but I want to also add another thing here. That when we take the zero trust approach, it does not mean, and it should not, and actually, sorry, not should, it must not be a blocker. So zero trust does not mean blocking, does not mean that you're going to prevent innovation. It does not mean that you're going to prevent things to be deployed. It, it could be sound strange telling this, but unfortunately some people does have that understanding that zero trust. You already saying, Alessandro, zero trust means that I need to verify everything, that I need to assume that breach, and I need to give someone the least privilege. Well, the least privilege is the least privilege for the work to be done. It's not mean that you're going to remove the privilege of everyone, then no one can work, and then you're blocking everything. Because then there is no business. So it needs to be a balance. For everything we need to do, what we need to do is to understand the risks. And understanding the risks, we can do the mitigations. But if we think of just blocking, then you won't be able to deploy anything. Then you won't have anything to protect. So it's kind of a chicken and egg. Right? How can I protect something that doesn't exist? If I protect too much, then that thing won't exist. So I won't be able to consume it. Just think about this. And as I mentioned the previous slide about repeat, is that continuous assessment and absolutely automation. All levels, application, data, infrastructure, and network. That's the great thing about using automation, and Tao will talk about it. Great thing. Tao is doing a lot of great work on this, and he will show some of the work. How can we go through that automation? If we think about what I just mentioned from automation, some of those pillars that we have been working is according to the Azure Landing Zone and Well Architecture Framework is to look at governance, which is applying policies, developing policies that will enable compliance. If you have a customer or a project that you are working that mandates, for example, is ISO 2071 or ISM or any other requirements, developing the Azure policies and enforcing these will make your deployment easier. And if I can say one more thing is make sure that your non-production environment, your production environment are the same. I've been talking a lot with some DevOps and some security people around this, with this concept of in non-production, we should have a kind of a different policy. No, you should not, because if you have a policy that allow you the developers to do things in production, sorry, in non-production, when it comes to production, he won't know what he is prevented to do and what he is not prevented to do. So the developers of an application, for example, won't have access to to Defender for Cloud or to a console to say, well, you deployed a VM, you are not supposed to have a public IP on that VM. Well, he won't know because in non-production, he was able to do that. But then you prevented him to do this in production. Makes no sense. So, and then from an infrastructure perspective, uh, I'm not saying you should not have a different environment, which is your development environment. You could call it sandpit, sandbox, whatever name you call it. Yes, that's your environment that you're developing the code. That's different from you doing the non-production production environment. Uh, then the other one is the security, which is making sure you have a security threat protection there. Solutions like Microsoft Defender for Cloud or Palo Alto or whatever other solution you have in mind, but it's very important that we have solutions like this. Then high availability. It's another thing to take in consideration as well. It's what is this solution that you are designing? Does it provide high availability? Is this actually a part of the requirement of the solution that you are working on? Is high availability required? How you protect your VMs, how you protect your apps, how you actually protect the data in case of an issue on one of the data centers. And we move to monitoring, which is making sure you actually monitor everything that you're doing and everything that's being consumed. If a user logs on to access something, you need to make sure that you're logging that action, that you're logging all the thing that is happening, not from all levels, from application, from infrastructure, from a database perspective, and from data. And last, the automation, making sure that you automate the whole process. It is possible, absolutely possible. It takes time, definitely takes time. I wonder sometimes if, and I've been questioning sometimes is, well, if I do this manually, it takes me less time. If I try to automate this, it would take more time. But if you think some of the benefits of doing automation, like you can be repeatable, you can later upgrade the code and have the same solution deployed again. You can protect yourself because there is no human interaction in the production environment. There is no one logging on to deploy anything. You can be absolutely sure that the environment that you have deployed is safe. It's zero trust. It's you built that and there is no one touching that environment. You've done everything through code. So before I move to the next talk about the other one, can I ask here in this call who already deployed a Azure landing zone in a production environment? Can I ask you to put the hands up if you have deployed an Azure landing zone in the production environment? No one? How about in a non-production environment? So some of the things when you deploy, when you think about, actually, better yet, does everyone knows in this call what a Azure landing zone is? Can I ask someone to put their hands up? Please don't feel afraid of doing this. That is, it's just so I can understand if everyone understand what is an Azure landing zone is. Is there anyone here on this call who doesn't? Just for the sake, Tal, can you, okay? Tal, can you do me a favor? Can you put in the chat the link for the uh, Azure landing zone well architected framework?
Yeah, I'll get it. I'll post on the chat.
So just as a quick talking about this, the Azure landing zone is an environment where you deploy Azure with the standards. Standards like governance, naming standards, standards like network, standards about the subscriptions, standards about the identity, standards about backup, HR, It's all defined and well structured. Um, and with that, a repo with automation, if you want to do automation, with all the coding that will allow you to deploy that environment. So one of the things that also we need to consider from a policy and equity, and I asked before, if you remember, is PIM, MFA, limiting access, and at the same time allowing access. Remember, blocking doesn't, zero trust does not mean block. Zero trust means giving the right access, protecting the asset. Okay. You did tell. Okay.
Yep.
So, and the other things that is important as well from an identity perspective. Um, I don't know if you ever heard about something called Microsoft Entitlement Management. If you have not, I put this slide here. Um, do research on this. It's a great solution that allows you to create some packagings where the user will come to the entitlement management and will ask for access, and you can set up workflows, and this access will be granted by approvers based on those workflows. I worked on a customer before, was a health customer, and where I had to choose this solution where some of those the actual end users were doctors, and we had to validate if the user were doctors. So we had, as part of the solution, the doctors coming to the solution access, asking to have access to, I don't know, SharePoint or an application, whatever it was. And at the back end, the solution was triggering a workflow of approvals for the administration of a hospital to validating the identity using API, and all of that coming together, the access would be granted. So it's a really nice solution. If you never heard about it, please do a research about Azure entitlement management. It's a really great solution to help and automate that lifecycle management of identity. Okay, so very few slides now to hand over to Tao. The last one is we talk about protecting the identity, we talk about protecting the infrastructure, and now we need to think about how we are protecting the data. So, and then this last one is, really making sure that we have data loss prevention, that we have backup, that we restrict access to a minimum as possible and workable, that we encrypt the data, that we can archive the data, that we document the retention, like how long does the data needs to stay, and after that, how the data would move from hot to code to archive or to delete, for example. How you are classifying the assets, how are you making sure that you are tagging everything that you deploy, so you can then identify the costs, for example, for based on departments, and also making sure that I monitor everything. But when I say monitor everything, make sure that we work together with the developers. I did had issue before where working with some of the customers and monitoring, the monitoring solution was monitoring the application, but it was recording the username and password. And we had a discussion about, well, the solution is wrong, the solution is right. The reality is the developer should have never store credentials in the code, because if you are monitoring sensitive information and the code is have clear text of the password and the username, well, it means the application is started wrong. Should never do that. So that are things that you need to consider when you're doing monitoring. So you need to understand what is that you are monitoring, what kind of information is going to be there, because in some cases they are cases they are sensitive. Okay, so I'll skip this one here because Tao is going to talk about the automation, and he's going to show. This is just a screen that I took from one of my environments that I've been playing with Defender for Cloud. This is to show that you deploy the solution, and once you deploy the solution, you can check in Defender for Cloud as a secure posture. What is the situation of that environment? How are you in compliance or not? And as you can see my screen, Defender for Cloud now can be used to multi-cloud. I can track my compliance against Azure, AWS, and Google. And it's a great thing because it means you can use a single solution to understand if you are meeting the compliance requirements for your customer. It doesn't matter which ones, ISO or SOC or PCI DSS or whatever it is, the requirement, as long as you make sure that you're meeting there. So I will hand over to Tao now. Thank you, everyone. Tao,
Thank you,
over to
Alexandro. Let me share the slide. And share the slide.
And please, if you have any question, just ask. Tao, if you want, I can give you control.
No, it's okay. It didn't work really well last time. But I'll do this because, sorry, I was in. I got a very ultra wide monitor, so if I share the whole screen, it's going to be very small. So I have to do it this way. You guys can see it, okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about automated Azure landing zone deployment. So Alexandro has briefly mentioned that asked what Azure landing zone is, and post a link here. So I'll touch base on that later. So basically, this was a real life engagement that we have engaged earlier this year. So I started working on this engagement in February this year, and the requirement was basically the customer has already got an existing Azure environment, but they want to set up the enterprise scale landing zone. They want everything to be automated. It's a financial institution, so a lot of government regulations are in place. And basically, they said we want to just press a button to deploy the enterprise scale. So, and then our team spent the next 3.5 months to develop the code, so we can get the customer to press the button to deploy it. So in the end, we came up with this solution using Azure DevOps and Azure Pipeline, right? And also using Bicep. So if you guys don't know what Bicep is a domain-specific language for ARM templates. So making has taken a lot of the complexity out of ARM template and making it more easier to write your infrastructure as code templates for Azure. From a syntax-wise, it's very similar to Terraform. For those ones have used Terraform before, you should find very familiar, easy to pick up. Okay, so one-click deployment to enterprise scale for this customer. So in the end, we have developed a series like 10 pipelines to execute in sequence. We configure those pipelines to be daisy chained. So when the first pipeline kicks off, finishes, that will automatically kick off the second pipeline, and so on and so forth. And we had in the end, in this particular environment, it took about 5 hours to complete the deployment end to end. So basically, the customer click a button and wait for 5 hours and waiting for it to progress. And then in the end, we had it deployed. So we had a lot of security requirements in here. Firstly, we don't want any user inputs. We don't want a user to enter any values to be used in the pipeline as a requirement for the customer. So everything is included in our code. So any values that, for example, resource names and stuff, that has to be in the code or generated by the code without any user inputs. And therefore, we try to avoid using the Azure Pipeline's variable groups to store any variables used by the pipeline because of that. So because someone can just go into the pipeline variable group and change the value, and we don't want that. So any changes to any code will go through the code review process. We have set up a code scan and various test to validate the code, to run the test before we actually deploy the code to any environments. We have set up branching policies, say to protect the release and the default main branch. So we enforcing code reviews and don't allow direct code commit to those branches because those branches will be used to deploy to an environment. And we also have pipeline approvals. So at each stage of the pipelines stages, someone from the customer will go in and then approve the execution. We have separate releases, release branches for non-prod and prod environment. So if I'm working on a feature branch, I can easily deploy that test and my code and deploy that to a non-prod, like a dev environment, but I won't be able to deploy to the production environment. I have to have my code get updated in a production release branch for me to run that. And we use least privileged service principals. So for example, if I have policy service principals to deploy policy definitions, that's all it can do, right? So you can't use that to deploy anything else. So least privileges for different pipelines, depending on what you try to execute, and it's short-lived. And customers really got concerns about the use of those. Some of the service principals will have high privileges, like owner rights to create subscriptions, for example. Customers has valid concerns for that. So what the customer has done is once this is completed, this exercise is completed, they completely delete the service principal. So if you want to run that again, you have to create a new service principal and then set up the connection again. There's some segregation of duty here. So for example, you have a network team to manage the networks, like IP allocations, and they manage the IPAM solutions. And so we have integrated our pipeline to customers' on-prem Infoblox IPAM solution using Infoblox APIs. So we are not even hard coding any IP allocations in our code. So when we deploy a new, for example, when we deploy a new subscription and the VNet, we'll simply call the IPAM API to get the IP ranges we are supposed to use for that particular VNet. And as Alexander has mentioned that, as part of the enterprise scale landing zone, we have naming standards. So the customer has defined at least a set of naming standards, and we have created a PowerShell module to be used as part of the pipeline to generate name. So you specify a bunch of parameters like, the application ID, call center, resource type, and etc. that will automatically generate a name for you, and you just consume that name as the pipeline progresses when you create the resources. And after this engagement, I have actually taken the original code, made an improvement, made it multi-cloud. So the initial code I've developed for this customer for the naming generation, that naming module was only for Azure. So I made it more generic, and then you can use that for any cloud. It's all driven by a JSON configuration file, which you can update yourself. I've open sourced it. This is the link to the repo, and it's also on PowerShell Gallery. You can grab a copy and then use it. So I've done a in-depth blog post on how to use that in a pipeline.
Tayo, sorry for interruption. I think your screen is not moving, so it's stuck.
Yeah, I know. I'm still on that screen. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, if you encourage everyone to have a look at this module if you want to. I'm going to the next screen. So can you see the next slide now? So I've got.
Yeah, can see.
Okay. Yeah, I've got.
It is better if you make it in presentation mode.
Yeah, sorry, I can't. Otherwise, it will just become very small. So these are the 10 pipelines. So firstly, I have a triggering pipeline. Basically, just give you a button to press, and this triggering pipeline will then trigger the first pipeline, which is the management group. So the management group will create the management group hierarchy for the enterprise scale, and then we progress this. We do policies, and then we do policy initiatives and assignments, and then we create the subscriptions, and we create a monitoring solution for using log analytics, and then we do a second wave of policy assignments which rely on log analytics, and then we do policy remediation. I'll go through them in details. So firstly, the triggering pipeline is really just a dummy pipeline. Say, hey, I'm starting the enterprise scale deployment, and then the next pipeline will have a pipeline trigger defined. So say, okay, so if the enterprise, if the triggering pipeline runs, and I'm going to start. So that's how I start the management group pipeline. So what management group pipeline does is this. This diagram is copied directly from the link that I pasted earlier. So this is a typical enterprise scale landing zone management group hierarchy. We deploy something very similar to this using Azure Bicep. So the pipeline, the first pipeline for the management group just lay out the foundations, create this hierarchy. And then we have the policy definition pipeline. So once the management groups are deployed, then we can deploy all the policy definitions that we are going to be assigned to this to store in the management group, like on the top level of management group for enterprise scale, right? So as you can see, I've got the display name has got ESLZ, stands for enterprise scale landing zone. And then we have the category name there, that was a customer's request. So they want to identify the policies that we deploy versus the ones that I already have. So we use this a naming prefix for all the policy definitions. And then we group the policies into initiatives, like what Alexander mentioned, the ISO controls. So Azure has got all these ISO controls stored in Azure already. So allowing you to map your policy into a ISO control, right? So you can do this by using this metadata field. So you define all the metadata groups for the policies that in your initiative, and then you can map each one of them to say, okay, so I have this policy to deny NICs with IP forwarding, and this is mapping to this particular ISO control. And you can specify them. So when the security people come into the portal and they look at the policy, they will see them, all those policies being grouped. So they will be easily to find out, like, from each ISO control, do I have non-compliant policies? And after the policy initiatives are created, we will then create a policy assignments to assign a subset of policies. So we call it policy assignment wave 1. So we assign all the policy initiatives that don't have any external dependencies. For example, right now I can't assign any policy. Say I want to deploy, deploy the diagnostic logs for the resources, because that requires a log analytics workspace, and we haven't got the log analytics workspace created yet. So, so for anything that we have deny or other effects policies, we assign them now, right? And those some examples is like we deny public-facing storage account, we deny the creation of public IPs, and we have a list of resources, whitelisted resources to be allowed for each subscription type. So for example, if you want to create a VM in a connectivity sub, you will get denied because it's not on the whitelisted, it's not a whitelisted resource. And we also have create a customized Azure security policy, security baseline initiative with customized parameters, because so this will allow us to provide customizations to only the security controls that applicable to the customer's environment. For example, by default, you will get the default policy will check if all of the features in Defender for Cloud are enabled, but for this customer, they did not want to enable some of the features. For example, they said, okay, for Azure SQL, we already have a third-party product we're using for that, and we want to continue to use that. So then, okay, then we disable this feature in Defender for Cloud, but we don't want this one to be flagged as a non-compliant policy. So we actually have an update, refined parameters to turn off that policy in this security baseline initiative. So that's the reason behind that. And then we assign we'll create all these assignments on the management group level, because we don't have any subscriptions yet, right? And then we create the first subscription, which is the connectivity sub. So this is your, if you talk about the hub spoke model, this is your hub, right? So we create the subscription, then we create all the networking resources in here. Like we create virtual WAN, virtual hub, and route tables. We create like Azure firewall and the policies. We create all the private DNS zones for private endpoints, and so on and so forth. So this is all your network hub. So we create that. And then we have a post-deployment task that at the end of the pipeline to delete the default Azure Defender for Cloud default policy assignment that's created automatically when you create the subscription, because we had already had another replacement one created before that. And then we use PowerShell to register features and resource providers. We're doing this resource provider registration here because to follow the least privileged concept, when other pipelines are going to are deploying the resources, they might not have the required permission to automatically register some resource providers. So we're registering them now using a higher privileged service principle, so it won't run into issues later. So so once the connectivity sub is created, and we create all other subs, so like we have a management subscription for the log analytics and monitoring. We have all the landing zone subscriptions for different areas. We have identity subscription where the customer was going to put the domain controllers in. And so everything at this stage, we create all the other subscriptions. They're identical for us, right? So we create VNet, and then we pair the VNet to that we have from the connectivity sub. And so we actually configure all these subscriptions that are created in parallel. We have like 6 or 7 parallel tasks running to create all these subscriptions all at once, right? So once this subscription is created, and the last thing one of the last resources we need to create is the log analytics and the configure Azure monitor. The bank, this customer has a requirement that everything has to go through a private endpoint. So we create a Azure monitor private link scope and the private endpoint for the log analytics. So we create log analytics that connect that to AMPOS, and then we create a various log analytics solutions that customer has chosen. We create a event hub and configure the log analytics continuous log export. So when the logs are coming into log analytics, will automatically gets exported to this event hub namespace. This is because customer has a third-party logging solution they need to ship the log to, and then the event hub is the integration point for this third-party solution. So we need to make sure that when we have the logs, the logs will be even in the event hub. The customer can connect to the event hub and send that to another place if required. And then we have configured NSG flow log, a storage account to store the NSG flow log. So so this is something that we can later on pick it up from this storage account and send that to log analytics using one of the solutions provided by Microsoft. Okay, so now that everything's deployed, we need to assign the remaining policies, right? So we assign the rest of the initiatives, and then that have external dependencies. So DINE, stands for deploy if not exist. So for example, when I deploy a storage account, I want to make sure that the diagnostic logs are automatically configured, and then to send the logs to log analytics workspace. And we also have set of policies for all the private endpoints that we're using. So when a private endpoint is created, we automatically do register that to the correct DNS zone. So other systems can resolve the names, connect to that private endpoint resource, and also the NSG flow logs shipped to the log analytics workspace. So and again, all these assignments are scoped to the root management group level, right? But then that becomes there's a problem. There's a chicken and egg problem here, right? We already deployed a bunch of resources that we didn't have the diagnostic logs configured, because this policy assignment was created after all those resources are created, right? Then in order to resolve that problem, so we had the last policy the last pipeline we have is the policy remediation. So for the policy remediation, we firstly use Azure Resource Graph in a PowerShell script to identify what are the non-compliant policies, and then once we get the inventory, a list of non-compliant policies, we start creating remediation tasks. So all those non-compliant, like missing, for example, all those missing diagnostic settings will automatically be created once we trigger the remediation task. And once all the remediation tasks are done, we trigger a compliance scan, right? So we want to bring that the compliance, the overall compliance, that percentage, the rating up. So you, based on our experience, you probably won't get because of this very time consuming, right? And everything is based on time. We might have to trigger this manually a few times, just the last bit, the policy remediation pipeline, to get everything to get all the compliance scan completed. And in the end, we had something like 99%. This is the real customer environment, so we had 99% in here. We had few issues all been identified, and we had a action plan for them. For example, the customers, because this is a brownfield environment, custom has too many high privilege users, for example, and this is something that outside of our control, the customer will need to take care of that themselves. So 99% is as high as we can go in this environment. We didn't get to 100% in there, but the team were really working towards that. So yeah, so that's the pipeline. I also want to spend some time just talk about the code analysis and the test. So we pretty much in all of my engagements right now, I'm using this tool called PS-Rule. It's a Microsoft open source tool that scans your ARM or bicep template against Microsoft best practices and flag any issues. For example, if you are creating a keyboard without having soft delete enabled, it will flag it, and then you will fail. You won't be able to move further than that. We also use GitHub Superlinter, which is like a Swiss Army knife for all the linters for various different languages. So we use that for code scan across, our repository. And I have written a post previously on how to do that using this GitHub Superlinter in Azure pipeline. The link is here. We do a what if and a test deployment in the pipeline. So if for the what if, if there are any offending resources against Azure policy, or if you're running out of quota, or if anything wrong with the template, this will detect that. Then you won't be able to move forward. And then obviously you can run your in-house custom test if required, right? So, and code reuse is very important in here. Like as you can see, it becomes really, really complicated, right? So we structure the bicep modules, same with Microsoft's Carmel library. Carmel is Microsoft's public library for bicep modules. And then we have for the YAML, for the pipelines, we have templates. So we have all those common tasks, group them into templates, and we just call the templates when we create a pipeline. This has significantly reduced my time in creating the pipelines. And normally you don't really see that, but by using the pipeline templates, I was able to, create a pipeline and then it successfully ran in the first attempt, which is something is unheard of. But yeah, so that's my suggestion to everyone. Have a look at it if you're working on Azure pipeline, have a look at the pipeline templates, and then so making reusable code. And that's pretty much for me. And Alexandra, I'll pass over to you.
Right on time, Tal. So just to finalize, I think, is there anyone who has any questions? I think we should open for questions now, or if not, I can just talk about some of the challenges we face when we engage. I saw some question here about right access to deploy, but is there any other question? We have about 36 people on the call, so no one has any questions. You can unmute yourself if you want to ask. I'll put in the chat.
I think no one has a question right now.
Okay, so I'll just to finalize, I will just think about some of the challenges we face when we work in some of these recent engagements where, you know, big issues we have faced on coming to security and coming to implement a full Azure infrastructure, which is, talking about um, automation and where your customer is not there yet, or talking about security when your customer is not in Azure yet, or is not mature or in the cloud environment. They pretty much have a on-prem environment and they are just about to get into Azure, or where they do have other cloud providers but don't have Azure environments. So some big of the challenges that we face, and that's one of the reasons I had that on that slide. Uh, the educate users. It's really coming down, to engage with the customer or engage with the team that you are working to develop with the environment, getting them to understand what are you doing. It's very important. Um, and the other thing we need to think about is, yeah, you deploy the solution, and what about who is actually going to operate that solution, right? Because you finish your engagement, whatever time it takes for you to um, to finish your project, but once you leave, how can you guarantee that it will still be there? Who is going to operate the solution that you are building? So please to make sure that this is also taken into consideration, that you take care of this. And my last piece of advice is work with security, align with them on what you're doing, and making sure that they understand that you are building the first, and you need the right access to build. Because that I actually I was talking to someone about this yesterday. It's like you asking us to come and build a house. You provide a empty land. We are coming here to build you a house, but you're not giving access to the builders so they can actually build the house. So the very end, there is nothing there to be taking off. Like an attacker could take or steal, because you are not actually able to build the house yet. So that is just a land, which is nothing. So if you can't build the house, there is nothing to steal. So that is, it's paramount to that ask about where I'm not given access to deploy. Well, then that is a conversation that you need to have with security, because if you can't build, there is nothing there to be protected. I hope I help you guys a little bit with this, and thank everyone for joining the session. Appreciate it. Tao, thank you very much. Always a pleasure sharing with you. You're great.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander.
And thanks everyone for the invite, and please do support the cause, and if you can, to help out.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Alessandro and Tao. It was really a great session. Even I learned so much, and I